I'm going to give a quick 30-minute talk on building a modern intranet in SharePoint, if you will. But I'm also going to build a larger conversation about what it means to have a modern intranet in today's day and age. Because as we know, with Office 365, that stuff's shifting. It's not just SharePoint anymore, and things are starting to change. So I have 3 sections that I'm going to talk about. What's a modern intranet? Because today, I would imagine we have some small businesses in the room. We've got some larger corporations in the room. And the great thing about Office 365 is it scales. If you're a small company, you can use it. If you're a large enterprise, you can use it too, maybe with some help or some additional third-party things. But it's really meant to be a scalable platform. And I'm talking about some internet best practices, and then I'm going to kind of encourage some people on how you can get started, no matter what size you are, in building a modern intranet. So, sound good? Cool. So I took this picture offline because it reminded me of what a traditional intranet looks like, you know, all buttoned up and kind of a top-down approach to communication, not as one way as we're used to in the past, but that stuff's shifting. So again, you used to create an intranet and you used to say, oh, here's my top-down information, and I hope people go to the intranet, right? If you're a small company, maybe you don't have an intranet, right? But if you're a large company, you're like, oh, I'm gonna drive people to the intranet because everybody needs to go there for one place, right? That's shifting, and that's shifting in a significant way for us. And so the question we get all the time is, with Office 365, do I even need a modern intranet at all, right? And so my argument in that conversation would be, if you want to have consistent clarity and communication across your organization, the answer is yes. Whether or not you need to build it out to the nth degree and have everything out there, probably the answer is no or maybe. But for the vast majority of companies, we have an intranet, right? And we're like 12 people, right? That's because we're trying to share information across the organization that lives somewhere after we've emailed it or texted it or sent a message to somebody. And we also don't have file shares, believe it or not. And all of our company-wide information is on our intranet. So I do think intranets are important. The big shift in intranets that'll be coming is around connected thinking and building this intelligent intranet. I know that's kind of a buzzword right now, but the idea of an intelligent intranet is that it's doing the work for you, so you don't have to look for information. I'm kind of looking forward to that day of just going there and it's like, it's all there, right? We're a ways off, but I do think every organization could get value out of an intranet if you're not just a one-man show. So there you go. So you could use an intranet. Again, like if you're not most companies are not just one person, some of them are. But if they're not, chances are there's collaboration, and good communication is two-way conversation, right? So everybody's got that email where it comes from the top, goes all the way down, or is a link out to the SharePoint intranet or somewhere, and you click on that and you read it and you're like, how is this applicable to me? And they got the comments turned off, and you can't make a comment, right? So modern intranets are kind of flipping that around a little bit. Not used to having this way over here. We might have to shift that for the next one. So I'm going to break this conversation into 2 areas for everyone to digest. If you're a small organization, this is kind of hard to define, but I'm going to use Microsoft's definition of small organization, under 5,000. I don't know if that's... I mean, that's kind of funny, isn't it? But they kind of have this like 5,000 limit all over the place, whether it's, you know, like thresholds or this or that. Well, they have this thing called, you know, hey, small companies are under 5,000. Well, I think small companies are like under 500. So you guys take or leave that. But so how are they organized? So I would like to present to you that a modern intranet is more of a digital workspace, and it is connected with the person or you at the center, right? And so the way we communicate to a lot of organizations now is not so much like this top-down approach. We've developed and started communicating in this concept of a loop. Microsoft has a diagram like this, but I can't really explain it because it's got so much stuff going on. So we kind of just redid it a little bit and made it easier to understand. So in the middle, it's all about the user coming to the experience, and that's centered around OneDrive. You guys are all kind of familiar with that. This idea of having a team or working with multiple people, maybe up to 50, you're going to have Microsoft Teams. That's going to be a part of your digital workplace moving forward. It's not going to go away. And actually, we're seeing more and more demand for Teams when it comes to frontline workers and their entry point to everything, rather than, I'm going to go to the intranet, top down, then I'm going to navigate to where I need to go. These people are coming to Teams and starting there and then navigating maybe to the intranet, but mostly having a conversation within their team, more so than Outlook. And then I kind of left Outlook out of here and some of the other ones out of here because it's kind of a given. But there's this thing in small organizations under 5,000, remember? That Microsoft's like, well, maybe you don't need an intranet, so maybe you can just build an all-company team, right? And so there's this thing, right, about building an all-company team. And I think it's going to start getting some legs in an all-company team if you turn off some things and have some governance around people just blasting messages out. But it is going to replace Yammer for a lot of the smaller organizations under 5,000. That's the strategy around that. Whether or not that works for your organization, that's kind of to be determined, as some of the Microsoft stuff is. But I would like to propose you could either go with an all-company team and a team site, because a team site gives you a lot of rich capability around news and file share, et cetera. Or you can go out and build an intranet, more of a publishing communication platform, traditional structure. And it really depends on how your organization works. We work with some large organizations that work in a lot of little teams. They don't need a big traditional intranet. And we work with some organizations that's very top-down. They want a traditional intranet. They want less work in the teams, right? And so it really comes down to how your organization works. But this is kind of how the digital workspace looks today. And we see a lot of success with smaller companies when they start with the OneDrive files, and then they roll out Teams, and they use a team site. And then if that's working, they're using more team sites, and then they look at building an intranet down the road. So it's kind of flipping that model on its head a little bit. And it's not all that easy. You guys are aware of that. But that's a start. So the other structure around simplifying and making a digital workspace for large enterprises looks something like this. People should still be using OneDrive. People will be working in teams. One of the clients we work with have a lot of Yammer communities around different topics or subjects, and they're using Yammer quite heavily to create community around, like how to sell better or how to, reach people in a certain demographic, right? And they're sharing information across their organization in this community. And they're also, most of the large organizations we're seeing are adopting a Yammer kind of all-company model in addition to having an intranet. And I'm not saying that, that's what we're seeing, right? And every organization needs to kind of evaluate what works for them. But today I'm going to dive into this component of kind of building a modern intranet. And let's say, because a Teams conversation is another 2-hour conversation. Yammer is a whole nother conversation. And I think for the most part, people that are in Office 365 understand OneDrive or understand how Box works or understand Dropbox. And so they kind of get the concept of sharing their personal information and creating content right in their own little OneDrive. So I'm going to dive into some intranet best practices. Now these, one caveat, they're not all the best practices, but it's the best practices we've seen questions come up to time and time and time again. And so we kind of put them all together and said, if you need to follow these best practices to start if you're going to build a modern intranet. Now, the term modern intranet to people that aren't in the Office 365 world might just think, oh, it's not like an old intranet, right? But the truth is, in SharePoint world, modern does mean something. It means they've completely revamped the way it works. It's not classic anymore, go figure. And the way you structure an intranet is completely different than how you might have done it in classic intranet publishing, right? And so that's the difference between modern and why we're going to be referring to it as modern. You guys can stop me at any point because this is a challenging conversation for some people. But this idea of like, there's no more subsites anymore. Like you shouldn't create a subsite under a communication site. So let me just give you a quick backstory. So we have an intranet called The Wire. We have in the old days, we would have a subsite called Work, and we would have another subsite maybe called Methodology, and we might have some subsites or pages underneath Methodology. And at that point, we're 2 and 3 and 4 levels deep. And then what's really neat about these intranets that have been built this way is that what do you put on these pages, right? Like they're just like landing pages, and they turn into like more navigation, and like users are really confused on like, oh, this is my real content, but I want people to get here, with some structure in mind. And so the flat structure is kind of the structure that's going to be the future of modern intranets. And everybody we work with, they constantly want to build like folders, right? Like folders inside of folders inside of folders. And it may make logical sense, but I'm submitting to you to build it flat and build the sites that you're gonna have content on first, right? And so each of these are at one level, right? And The Wire, our intranet, or the hub, in a hub site, is kind of in the future. Is it available right now? Yeah. Okay, it's available right now. Home site will be kind of where everybody goes, and it's kind of official, and it gets official news badging, it gets a lot of other things that Microsoft is promoting as like your intranet homepage, right? But in this new flat world, I'm creating all these sites as like siblings to each other, not any hierarchy. And then the way we introduce hierarchy is visually, right? And so our intranet, The Wire, has Work and Methodology. Other people can say, what methodology do we have at our company? And they can go to Work and Methodology and find the methodology we support right now. But Work and Methodology don't exist anywhere. They're just a virtual navigation structure, right? And so think about this. I know we've done our best to create some visuals around this. I've seen visuals where things have spoke, and I think just knowing that your navigation does not have to be your site is probably the biggest mind shift that you can get out of moving to modern. A lot of planning involved with that because there's more granular ownership. We can get into some of the things around site designs and some of the larger organizational tools that Microsoft allows as well. So how does this manifest visually? So sometimes I'll talk about it and then I'll show diagrams and people are like, I don't quite get it, right? Or they get it, but then everybody really gets it when it hits like a mega menu, right? So our hub site navigation, I'll use this there we go, is home, and then life, work, and playbook. And we use a mega menu structure. And work and methodology, the sites don't exist. The sites that really exist are project delivery, design thinking, training, right? With content that's in there. And so we recommend that if you're gonna build an intranet, just start with a hub. Just do it, because you're gonna wanna create a subsite, and you're not gonna create a subsite and a communication site, and it's not gonna work. So start with a hub, start flat, and then if you have to, and you don't have navigation that works in the mega menu, we highly recommend not putting nav in this level. It's called a local navigation. Not putting nav at all in here if you can represent it in the mega menu, okay? And, but if you have to, make it just 4, 5, 7, like just kind of your standard navigation rules there. So, any questions on like hub sites and, yeah?
Are those other sites In the hub site, members of your hub site, or do you?
I would prefer they would be members of the hub site if they were represented in the navigation. They don't have to. Microsoft recommends you don't link to documents in the navigation because it like opens up a new window. I mean, Modern opens up new windows like all the time anyways, so. So the short answer is yes, they probably should be in a hub site, but they don't have to be in that hub site. The hub site benefit is you're going to get branding. You're going to get there's a whole laundry list of benefits. You're going to get integrated news benefits, and we recommend if you're going to build an intranet in the modern world, build a hub site, and just if you're going to have other sites, maybe you get to it another way, right? Just keep all those hub sites together. I know maybe I didn't answer that directly clear. Okay. Sometimes I wonder, did I answer that direct? Okay. So the other best practice I want to present is news. And so a lot of intranets exist because they want to communicate to the rest of the organization. And one of the best practices that, I don't know if it's written anywhere, but we try to subscribe to it, is make a site per news category. So in the past, you probably have like one news site, and you probably had managed metadata, or a whole bunch of tagging. So you would tag the topic and maybe where the department came from and all this other stuff. If you have lots of categories, we're recommending create a site per category because you can organize the news in a hub site using the web parts very succinctly. And so you can control which news shows up where using the modern web parts. And you'll be able to select which sites the news come from. Otherwise, the news web part doesn't really give you like a lot of granular refinement outside of an audience targeting. That's it, right? And so unless you want to build something custom or use the featured web part where you can get some metadata query, now I'm getting really off the deep end of technical. There's that capability there, but we've seen a lot of success where people just use the communication sites and they create a site per news category.
Have you ran into a customer that successfully used audience targeting? What parts are things like that?
In the old SharePoint? Yes.
In modern.
In modern. Yeah. See, it's so new. How new is it? Like a couple months old?
Yeah, it's really new.
Yeah. So, and we do a lot with GCC, government tenant as well, which is like a year behind the main tenant. And so, I guess the short answer is no, we haven't done any of the audience targeting that they've said is working now. I know Microsoft said they weren't going to move their main intranet to modern until audience targeting was rolled out, and of which I think they rolled it out and then they were able to roll out their main intranet. So they were actually holding off rolling their intranet out. But
I know you need that, which a lot of people have problems with.
a clean AD, yeah, I can imagine. Yeah, keep the AD nice and, yeah, for sure.
What do you mean by a clean
Active Directory, you need to have departments assigned to every
Yep.
employee.
There's a lot of people who don't assign departments, don't assign skills. I mean, the concept is if I have a news article that's about a sales thing, I want that to go to the sales personnel, not everybody necessarily. Or if I have a training thing, so I give audiencing, the only way to do that otherwise, so let's say you're generating 500 things of content, the only way to limit that is with permissions, which you really don't want to do, because just because I'm creating a news article doesn't mean that nobody should get, these people shouldn't get access to it. I just want the salespeople to be promoted to them.
Right. So the way we've kind of tricked audience targeting by having multiple hub sites. And so let's say we have a leadership hub site. When the leadership logs into the intranet, okay, and they're the only ones with permission to the leadership site, that content is trimmed automatically anyways. And so I'm kind of wondering, like, some audience targeting makes sense, but then I'm also seeing like just trimming content is how it's been done as well. So I'm looking forward to diving into audience targeting, but I know, like you said, a clean AD is the challenge for sure. So a few more things about news best practices. Was there another hand? Okay. A few more thing about news best practices is set an official news site if you have multiple sites that are publishing news. So your company knows which news is like official news. And Microsoft has some PowerShell scripts and stuff you can do that with, which we recommend. And then again, and I'm going to demo some of this. Use the news web part, use it like multiple times on the page, and use it by trimming which news is coming from which hub site to create a better news experience, so it's not just like a full blast. And also in the news web part, if you're not familiar with Modern, is you can prioritize which news stays there and which news comes in automatically, so you're not always fighting news that's coming from like a rogue group to your intranet homepage. You can say, no matter what you publish, these two are always going to be here, and the rest will be as generated, people powered. There you go. Also, we recommend if you're a larger organization, turning on like page approvals, which is built with Power Automate, makes it super simple. If you're worried about people publishing stuff to the main corporate intranet, that could be a challenge. Turning on approvals, it's really simple now with Power Automate. And then publish to email and Teams. So when you create a news article out in your intranet world, automatically publish to email. And then if you have Teams, don't publish to email, publish to Teams, right? And you can set up workflows where when news goes out on the intranet, people are receiving that news, whether it's in their SharePoint mobile app, which I use and several of our clients use, or it's in their Teams and they get a notification and then they're brought back to read the full article. That's kind of a mind shift too, because we're so used to people saying, I just want my newsletter in my email, And hopefully we're getting beyond that. I don't know, maybe 5 more years of Teams, adoption. Publish to Slack instead of Teams. I believe you can do that.
Yeah, it still would be another different connector for Power Automate. Yep.
Yeah, we definitely recommend driving people back to the content sources so they're not looking for stuff. Another great benefit of intranet is if you're onboarding a lot of people all the time, you don't have to go back and, when they onboard with email, it's from that point forward, they don't get a lot of that historical information. So, okay, best practices. The other new thing, I think it's new, relatively new, is creating an organizational. Is anybody using the modern SharePoint intranets today? A few people? Okay. Well, if you're using it and you haven't turned this on yet, it's called organizational wide asset. And then any hub site that you have, and you add if you are uploading assets, you can select from an organizational wide asset library, so you're not hunting all over the place on where your official assets are for your organization. And so some of the stuff we recommend is creating your organization-wide asset library, creating some standard headers for people to use. You would be surprised on how long people take picking out header photos if they're allowed to choose them, right? And it's just, content's really important here. And so create some basic header images, create some standard roll-up images, and publish those to your organizational-wide asset library. Any questions on that? So we try to get some new stuff in here, some larger organizational change management type stuff as well. I'm going to dive into a demo. Just a minute. Let me make sure I'm on the last slide. There it is.
Where do the organizational assets show up? Is it just in SharePoint?
I've seen it shows up when you select an asset, whether you're doing an image selection in content or you're selecting header images. When you go to pick an image, it'll show up there. That's a great question. I don't think so. I can look. Have you heard?
I don't believe it's integrated there, but I would imagine it's something that, they integrate all of the other remote targets that you might have.
So these are rapid fire. I only have a few minutes, and so I'll kind of dive into a few of these things. So this is the Wired we've got some, if it's going to load, we've got some things that we presented. It's a ball mouse up here, guys. So, sorry, it's kind of funny. We have these two kind of rotate out on a important basis. And we have kind of an all news. We have some client success conversations, some enrollment stuff. I'm kind of showing you some limited things, so I'm not giving you everything. But we have some things like we announced to the rest of our team here in Lansing. Skype for Business is phasing out, so if you're managing projects, just get rid of that. Some retro things that we're presenting, and then we're using it very, very basic right now. We have a section to call out a playbook that employees can look at, and then we have a company calendar that we kind of manage. So, we're not a huge organization, but we use it to gather and structure content. And then across the top here, we have life around benefits and work, some of the service areas, some things on brand and apparel. Our brand and apparel is really popular with everybody, and so we're constantly looking at that. And then that playbook site that I mentioned. And I'm going to kind of dive into a little demo around news. And so I attended a digital summit 2019 at the end of last year. And after that summit, I just created a quick little article summarizing my visit with some photos I took of one of our client teams that I went with. The ones that would take photos, we kind of went out. And so I published this out on our intranet, and we have a few things that are set up, and this just gets promoted. Anybody with an app gets a notification. And then a couple things I wanted to show while I have time. I think this is new, but you can do cropping. Oh, Mike hasn't logged into there. You can do cropping right in the photo now. I think of like last week. So it literally just dropped. And this is why this user group is important, because stuff just keeps overnight. I get like 3 or 4 updates on a tenant. It's like, where did all this stuff come from? And so there's cropping right in line now, some great tools set up there. And then the editing experience just blows old SharePoint away. Like, I'm not even gonna go there, like educating people on how to use content by query web parts and how to use a content by search web part and which display template to pick when they're building the page, just it kind of goes away. Well, not goes away, but gets better. And so a couple things, I'm just gonna show real quick a really common situation or scenario. If I can edit this, is that how you do edit it? Psh. Okay, you got some. I'm trying to click this button, but it's not. I'm hitting the change image button. SharePoint, come on, work with me. See this button right here?
Yeah, I know what you're talking about. Just got updated.
It probably did, you blink and it's like, okay, I'm using Mike's computer for the first time, so maybe it's a permissions thing. Nope, there it is. Okay, so yay. So this just shows some of the recent images in my organization, but if I go to this is new when you deploy the asset thing. And then you can create more folders called global assets. And then for us, I went through and just organized this because honestly it was just all in one big pile. I just went through and organized it. But let's see here, if we go to titles, here's some of the standard roll-up things, and then here's a header, right? And then you can go into like some of our team photos if you want to use them, or there might be additional story photos if you're not looking, if you just want something to throw in there for visual interest. And so this is huge for organizations that have more than one contributor, which is everybody, I would hope. Trevor, we need to turn this on.
Just tell them, I don't know why you're not turning this on.
Well, it just came out. I know you were going to think about that, so I thought I'd say it. But this is huge, and it's been great so far. And again, we just had it. And then another thing that people ask a lot about is kind of templates. And I will tell you, the news templates aren't great. You can't really create a news template and then have news being created from it and then want to modify it or whatever. It's kind of from this point forward. And so a lot of people go in here and just say, copy this news post, and they create a new news post. and they edit just like a Word document, right? And they do that. Or if you do a new news post, which I recommend creating a news template just with some of the standards that you want to see across your organization. So I'm going to wrap up because we've got some awesome demos. I'm going to go to the next slide if you want to switch me back.
So I got a quick question. Is that either on that Office 365 or is that like just the newest version?
So SharePoint within Office 365 using a communication site.
Okay.
Which some of those things are in Office or in SharePoint 2019, but
Yep.
the differences between the two is significant, and it keeps getting more significant every day because, as we were talking about launching, they produce new features on a weekly, monthly basis, and they're coming in, and those features are coming to Office 365 first, and then when the next version of SharePoint comes out, they'll incorporate some or most of those features, but usually even by the time that the next version releases, Office 365 is ahead.
Good point. I just got a couple more slides. People ask us how we can get started all the time, right? Whether they're small businesses or they're large corporations that haven't went to Office 365 yet, which there's a handful of them out there still, a lot using Google. So we recommend starting with personal files first, getting everybody's personal business figured out, right? Because people are kind of onerous of that. And then working on Teams files and then everyone's files, and that's where you would launch an intranet, right? So that's a quick kind of next step thing. The other thing, just some takeaways, it's a mind shift, it's a new way of working. Thinking about it flat, thinking about teams first, thinking about change management, communication. Don't forget communication and culture as you roll out an intranet. We could do a whole talk in which we have some talks on around just change management with executive leadership, right? How to get executive leadership on board or executive assistants on board because they're doing a lot of the work for the executives. And so there's some things around that. Run a pilot and focus on content, not design. So a lot of people are like, well, I don't like the design of the navigation on the hub. Just go with it. I know that's kind of sounds rough. Go with it because Microsoft is coming out with stuff so fast and they are fixing some really great stuff. We've launched a few large intranets over the last few months and it's already like, oh yeah, now we got mega menu, so just being patient with that is huge. But run a pilot, like even if it's for a certain team, run it in modern, run a pilot, learn from it, make it happen. Invest in third-party intranet solutions last, okay? And this is because we're seeing a lot of third-party intranet solutions out there that are gonna cause you a lot of pain as Microsoft continues to roll out modern. And invest in PMP first if you're gonna customize. So the patterns in practice, and I'll put together a link of just all these resources that we've gathered for this presentation. I'll send that out to you guys. And look at patterns in practice first. If you don't find something you're liking there, develop an SPFX web part and get by. Do not go like full custom because they can't keep up with the development. They don't have an inside loop on the Microsoft stuff. And so we're running the Unily, Valo, all these other solutions that are rolled either custom. We used to write custom solutions. We're not ashamed of that. We used to write custom intranets, some really large ones. That stuff is all going modern and very successfully. And then use native mobile apps to drive adoption. You'd be surprised. The executives love their mobile apps and they will sing praises to all of Office 365 when it works for them most of the time, except for yesterday with Teams being there. Sorry, I had to speed talk them. It was rough. Yeah, I can attest to that, just with a couple of clients. So we're just going to do, is there any, we did questions throughout? Okay. I kind of sped through the end of that because I actually timed it and I was like, man, I'm going to be 20 minutes. And then it was not 20 minutes.
I'll throw a question out.
Yeah.
Any SharePoint web parts you could recommend that you're seeing a lot of investment on Microsoft side, whether it's Planner or
All of the above. Like they are producing lots of web parts, all the time. They're improving the web parts. The latest one latest update they did to the highlighted web part was a huge improvement. When they first launched, the highlighted web part was not at all a replacement for the content by search web part. You couldn't do any sort of filtering that was at all complex or at all even relatively basic stuff.
You could only do ands or ors. Or something
You could only do ands within the same it was not only was it simple, but it was also complex in regards to explaining to someone within a type of data that you were getting, whether it be from search or from the list or from somewhere else. It was and then between them it was ors. So it made it very, very difficult to figure out. But they fixed that, right? They've invested pretty heavily in everything. Like they're putting out new stuff all the time.
The news web part is so scalable to like, you want to build something on the front page versus you want something on an interior page somewhere. There's an option for the news web part that works. So
Yep.